Thank you so much, Jeffries, for handing over, and thank you so much, Paul, for your excellent moderation, which I'm now trying to follow with regard to timekeeping. Half an hour is awfully short for the big topic we want now to dig a little bit deeper into. We want to look at economic priorities. We want to look at the post-COVID world, the economic recovery, domestic economic priorities, but also take a look at what we need to do internationally together. And we want to ask if there is a window of opportunity to revitalize the World Trade Organization, and if this maybe is the time for multilateralism, because if I look at the agenda of both the EU and the US, I don't see bilateral trade agreements very high on the agenda. I'm very honored to introduce Ron Kind to you. You know him, he's a member of the House of Representatives and part of the Ways and Means Committee. And Daniel Caspary is, I think, on his way. He is a member of the European Parliament. He has been in trade for a long time. He is an expert on these issues and also happened to be the chairman of the German delegation. So I've known him for quite a while. So I would say, one, that we start nonetheless as long as we are waiting for Daniel. And I would like to ask you the question, what you think should be the main domestic priorities on which the EU and US could work together to make a jump from one level to the next with regard to environmental issues, climate issues, but also digital issues in a post-COVID world. So the floor is yours, Juan.
Well, thank you, Dr. Milner. And I was just doing a quick look at your bio and realized we have a shared experience. We both did graduate programs at the London School of Economics and International Econ. And because you're much younger than I, you came much later. Not to betray my gray hair, but I was there in the mid 80s and really enjoyed my 2-year experience there and that. But well, hopefully Mr. Caspary will be able to join us shortly. But I do want to give a quick shout out to my very dear friend, James Ellis, for the invitation to participate. Good to see James today. You know, whenever James calls and he asks for something, my immediate answer is yes, of course. And then he tells me what I got myself involved in. But thank you, James. Also, Vivian Haig, who I have known for many years and is a dear friend as well. And I also saw on the line in part of the party, one of my all-time favorite former members of Congress, Jim Colby. Jim was involved in the transatlantic relationship for years, had a chance to travel with Jim overseas on a number of occasions, which were really death marches as opposed to travel opportunities because of how hard Jim always worked. But glad to see Jim still very active and involved in that. And I understand 2 of my current colleagues had a chance to participate, Jim Costa, Stephanie Murphy. Hopefully they were on the panels. I apologize, I wasn't able to tune in at that time. But these are 2 of the more forward-thinking members of Congress that we have, very much engaged in trade relations, very involved with the transatlantic relationship too. So I'm glad they had an opportunity to weigh in. So what can we do to collaborate and work forward? Well, come January 20th, there's a new sheriff in town. We're going to have a new administration. On behalf of us Democrats, we're very relieved that we were able to carry the election in November, because you're going to see a pretty drastic and different approach to our democracy. I think Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, his partner, the administration that they're putting together right now are going to be very devoted to the respect for democratic institutions, for democratic norms and values, but also the appreciation of having friends and allies globally, those that we can work with in a collaborative fashion, to respect, to find areas of common ground, rather than to belittle and to take for granted. We've had too much of that the last 4 years, but also the need for strengthening of alliances and our trade relationships. First and foremost, the Biden administration will have a high priority on deploying a safe and effective vaccine. And I know the EU is focused on your own strategy back home. That's priority number 1, 2, and 3, to try to inoculate our population, make them safe, and then build back better. That's been Joe Biden's mantra during the course of the presidential campaign, what we can do to rebuild America in the wake of the coronavirus, and then working with our allies across the globe to strengthen and rebuild the global economy. And there will be opportunities to do that. But it all starts with a healthy population. And we have a lot of work to do. And I think an important work for the US and the European Union to work on together in the deployment of a vaccine on a global basis, especially in the less rich nations, the developing world, who are going to need our help to keep their citizens safe. So there's going to be a strong partnership that will be required. Otherwise, if we do everything right at home and we don't address the needs with other countries, it's not going to work very well. And this pandemic is going to stay with us, and it's going to hinder growth and opportunity, and we just can't have that. So I know the Biden team and the healthcare team that they've assembled are very much focused on that task right now. Very promising results with some of the vaccines out there. Now we need to be able to do this in a safe, effective, efficient manner and convince people on a global basis to get vaccinated. And we still have hurdles with the anti-vax movement coming up. And then I think there's an opportunity in strengthening our trade relations. First of all, revisiting the 232 tariffs that have been used pretty indiscriminately by the current administration to much of our objection in Congress. I'm one of the leading voices on trade policy in Congress, one of the senior members on the Trade Committee, been very critical of President Trump's trade policy, especially his treatment to our closest friends and allies, and using a national security clause as an excuse to hit the EU, to hit Great Britain, Canada, Mexico, even South Korea, under the guise of national security reasons with tariffs, which, as we know now, invites retaliation. It's silly to think that you guys pose a national security risk to the United States of America. The legislation that I've introduced on a bipartisan basis would roll back that authority, give Congress a greater voice before the imposition of these tariffs so that we don't go down this dark alley again and turning on our friends when it comes to trade policy. And I think when the dust settles with the new administration, there's going to be great interest in moving forward and strengthening those trading bonds. Obviously, we have a lot of work to do where we left off with TTIP negotiations. For those of us who have been involved for years, James, I'm looking at you right now. We know where the hurdles are. We know where the traps are when it comes to our trade policy with each other. So that should be no surprise. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't get back in the game as quickly as possible. I'm still convinced that if the US and the EU can get on the same page with our trading rules, that will set the template for a global rules-based trading system that'll be hard for China to ignore, given their rise. Nor do we want to isolate them. We want them to be responsible members of the global trading community, but with that comes responsibility. And that's where the US and the EU in a collaborative fashion could make clear the rules of trade that we expect other nations, including China, to abide by. So I think the goals and the objectives that the Trump administration tried to accomplish with China is shared globally with the democracies of the world. It's the tactics and the strategy that he used that there's going to be a divergence from with the Biden administration. There'll be a more collaborative approach, a more important partnership with our historic allies and how we can best address China's rise as a responsible member and what those trading rules should look like. And then finally, I've been one of the leading voices in Congress for support of the World Trade Organization, but also recognize the need for the reforms that need to take place within the WTO. I drafted a resolution that passed unanimously in the Ways and Means Committee, expressing Congress's support for the WTO, but also recognizing the work we need to do to strengthen the dispute resolution process, some of the other items that have held back progress with the WTO. I know it can be an incredibly frustrating institution. I led a bipartisan delegation there last fall to have meetings with the ambassadors, including your newly installed EU ambassador to the WTO. We need to be doing more of that. But any organization that requires unanimity to make any progress is going to be hard and difficult. But it does still play a vital role of making sure that we do resolve trade disputes peacefully and not through self-help and not through force of arms. We saw where the breakdown of the global trading community left the world in the 1930s and what that led to. We don't want to go down that dark path again. So again, it speaks to the need for a strengthened WTO, a strengthened collaboration between the US and the EU, try to figure out if there's a landing zone for Brexit, which is hanging over all of us right now. I'm currently co-chairing the bipartisan US-UK Interparliamentary Working Group. Large part of our focus is on the Brexit negotiations and the potential for a US-UK bilateral, which is still a work in progress. But that relationship too is going to be very, very important. So those are just a few of the items, Dr. Milner, that I thought I'd tee up for further discussion. Not sure if Daniel had a chance to join us yet, but let me just leave it there. And also recognize Bruce Stokes, who I see in the audience too. Bruce and I go way back throughout the years, and it's very good. I understand Wendy Sherman had a chance to address the group a little bit earlier too. I've been one of her biggest fans in Congress throughout the years. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman. This is wonderful how you outlined those three priorities. And thanks for spotting that our alma mater is the same. I didn't see that. I spotted something else, though. I was a high school student in Illinois doing one of those one-year senior exchanges, and my host parents, they were all from Wisconsin. So we spent our Christmas times in close to Madison. So there's another thing we have in common.
You need to come back and visit us sometime. We'd love to have you.
I will. So Daniel has been, Daniel Kaspari, he's been able to join us. So thanks so much for being here today with us. So I would like to give the floor immediately to you to also ask you the question, what are the main domestic priorities from your point of view, which have a strong transatlantic component and where we need to work together?
Yeah, dear Ms. Milner, dear James, dear Vivian, dear Ron, dear friends. First of all, I have to excuse, it was quite funny or not funny at all, however you see it, because 2 minutes before the meeting, Vivian called me and said, Daniel, where are you? And I said, I just tried to log in. And then I hang up, and then I realized it said wrong meeting link. And then we had to sort this out, and it took some minutes. So sorry for being late, but I listened to you, Ron. And frankly speaking, from my perspective, I think what we saw during the last 4 years, we saw the worst transatlantic relations after the Second World War. That was a big mess, which has been created, I think, on both sides, because one side had an interesting agenda and the other side was not able to give a proper answer to come to a better situation. And therefore, I think when we see the global situation, just yesterday, I learned the latest figures about global economic development under the COVID crisis. I learned that this year, there's only one country on the world which has a growing GDP, that is China, with plus 2%. And all other countries on the globe have a negative GDP growth. And when I see the European Union, for instance, this year, we have a negative GDP growth of 9%. And next year, the forecast tells me for China 8%, and for the European Union plus 4%, and also for the United States plus 4%. And what does this mean? The gap between growing China from a low base up to the European level or to the United States level, this gap became much, much smaller during this year and will get even smaller next year. And I think after the 4 lost years in the transatlantic relations, which we just have been seeing, it is really up to us on both sides of the Atlantic to make sure that on the one hand, the new Biden team, and on our side, Ursula von der Leyen and her team really can develop a good transatlantic relationship to really challenge the challenges together. And what does I mean with this? When we go back some years, when we started, for instance, the TTIP process, I think we were even late. But then we started with the ambition to close the negotiations, as our American friends said, with 1 tank of gas. I think we all saw it had to be a very big tank, and we tried to put in everything into TTIP, and perhaps that was too much. And now I think we should try not to relaunch TTIP or something like that, but I think we should perhaps try to stay under the radar screen and solve a little issue, one issue by issue, one after the other. For instance, just the last plenary week of the European Parliament, we passed something which was called the lobster deal, because we sorted out the lobster issue, which is not that important for global economy, but it was a sign and a signal that for the first time for months, if not for years, we were able to solve an issue, to find a solution, and to get it passed through the European Parliament. And I think that was very good news, even if it was a small sign, but it was a symbol. And you know that the political worth of symbols we should not underestimate. And therefore, I think we should try to go this way, having not the picture of one tank of gas. We know that on the European side, we now change more and more to electric mobility, and there the batteries are even smaller. So perhaps let's go with one filled battery after each other, so small distances, but perhaps more successful. And then, but to do it continuously. And then I hope during the next 4 or 8 years, we really could deliver things to our citizens, but we should try to start now, as soon as possible. And the other big story, when I see this big trade agreement on the Asian side, I was very much negatively surprised how successful the Chinese managed to get this agreement done and to fill this vacuum. And I was very negatively surprised about the situation that they even agreed to try to set up common standards in future. And when, if not now, the transatlantic relationship should also focus on setting up joint standards. I think that has to be very on top of our agenda, standard setting. If not, the battle is lost, not only for the Europeans, but also for the US side in the big battle with the ASEAN, Asian region. And therefore, it is up to us to make sure that both administrations on both sides also tackle that issue. And why am I optimistic? When you see Ursula von der Leyen, I think even much more than Jean-Claude Juncker before, Ursula von der Leyen as Commission's president on our side, she's really interested in good transatlantic relations. She has this background for years. She was active in the field of defense before, even when she was only a minister on the state level 15 years ago. She was interested in transatlantic relationship, and therefore I think with her on top of the European Commission, that is a very big chance we have. The second thing is we have a, let's say, unusual situation in my home state, in Germany, that normally 1 year before an upcoming election, like we will have it next September in Germany, the state leader is a lame duck. But what you can see with Angela Merkel, she's not a lame duck, but she's a very active eagle. And we should use this unexpected big power of Angela Merkel, not only in Germany, but on the whole European level, really to come to solutions and to come to conclusions within the next 12 months until the end of her chancellorship. And again, I have to repeat this because in politics, this is quite unusual. She's not a lame duck. She's a very strong, high-flying eagle at the moment. And together with Ursula von der Leyen, we should try to take this chance. And the situation in the European Parliament, it's always difficult because it is easy within the European Parliament to launch anti-American sentiments. That always has been the case, and this is also the case in this Parliament. But I think some members are waking up. They are waking up because what China has been doing for years against the European Union and against the United States, they are waking up because they see how COVID affects the United States, the European Union very negatively at the moment, and how China is taking its chance under its communist system to really take out every gain they could do out of this crisis. And a lot of people realize that some of those who spoke out the most loud against the TTIP agreement then regretted the loudest after President Trump came into power that we didn't do anything with together with the United States. And therefore, I think we have a window of opportunity. We should try to use it, and we should try to make sure that perhaps we can make sure that on both sides of the Atlantic, even if it is difficult and even if we have very many domestic issues on both sides of the Atlantic, that we try to also focus our administrations really to deepen the transatlantic relationship and to use this window of opportunity, which we have at least for the next 12 months, but we should not wait until it is closed. We have to use it and we have to go through. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. And I'm very sure that if Chancellor Merkel would have been listened to you, she would have been delighted not to be called a duck, but an eagle. Thank you so much for that very vivid picture. We have a comment by Bill who tells us that we shouldn't give up on us and the Brits and that issue. So I think it's more of a comment than a question. But Bill, would you still like to contribute? Then I would hand over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I didn't anticipate that because I'm an ex-member, missing Brussels, missing the Parliament, missing the transatlantic dialogue. And just to say that we're going through a very bad time in the UK at the moment. Boris Johnson is making an unbelievable mess. He's like a mini Trump. He's just a disaster, but we have to suffer it and go through it. But I just want to assure everybody we're coming back and we're your friends, and don't listen to the rhetoric, but we have to go through this pain like the Americans did under Trump.
And in the meantime, look after our little staff.
Thank you so much for being very reassuring. We have until 5:05, so we have five more minutes than we actually had. Let me take the opportunity to ask our two speakers a question about the legislative dialogue, which had been once upon a time very strong. I think it wasn't. It, at least from the outside, didn't feel or look like that strong in the last few years. And I wanted to ask you if you are going to revitalize the dialogue and what you will put onto the priority where the two, the Parliament and Congress, could actually work together. And then I would also hand over to Jeffries for a question which he has. Jeffrey, should we maybe collect a few questions and you jump in with your question, and then I hand over again to our two parliamentarians.
Thank you very much, Stormy. Congressman Kind, you talked about the Section 232 mess that hopefully will begin to be resolved. Let's hope for that. And of course, that brings the question in my mind as well, that lots of governments are going to be spending lots of money in the COVID recovery period in supporting businesses, industries, for very good reasons. How much do you worry, and how much should we worry about this distortions and the kind of disputes of the future being created? And is there something that in the EU-US relationship we can think of or establish, maybe at a principle level, as to how we might avoid creating those distortions, or just putting our minds at rest that we're not kind of creating those new distortions in the future?
Yeah, Jeffries, that's a great question. And I know on the Trade Committee in Congress, we've had numerous hearings.
Congressman, we can't hear you anymore. Your mic went off.
Oh, I think I'm back on again. There we are. Thank you. Jeffries, that's a great question. I was just saying that on the Trade Committee in Congress, we've had numerous hearings already on the international supply chain issue in light of COVID and the disruption that occurred, but also the complex interdependence that's been built up throughout the years. That's especially true when it comes to the US-EU relationship. You know, we have an international procurement agreement through the WTO that the Trump administration has been attacking and belittling. I think that would be a serious mistake if we roll back our participation in that. And we've made that clear with the current administration as well as the incoming administration. Listen, there are unforeseen hurdles and obstacles to emerge from this COVID crisis. It's going to require a collaboration, perhaps, that we haven't seen since the Second World War to really put the global economy on sound footing again. And that starts with making sure that our populations are as healthy as they need to be, because we know the two key ingredients to GDP growth is workforce participation and worker productivity. You can't hit any of those marks as long as people are afraid for their health. And that's why it's going to be a priority in the early stages of the Biden-Harris administration to focus on that global response on COVID and distribution of the vaccine, and then build from there. And I think there will be many opportunities. But I also concur with what Daniel said earlier. Trying to take a bite out of TTIP again is a step too far. There's going to be a lot of domestic focus here in the United States for the first year. And the first year of any administration, I don't care who they are, there's going to be a heavy domestic focus. But that's not going to stop Joe Biden from extending that arm out to reassure our allies that there's going to be a new game and a new approach to our relationship. He's already doing it with the phone calls and the conversations that he's having. So I have complete confidence that this incoming administration can walk and chew gum at the same time, address the immediate domestic needs that we all have, but also fostering and nurturing that international relationship, which has been floundering the last 4 years.
Mr. Kaspari?
Yeah, if I may perhaps focus on the Transatlantic Legislators Dialogue. I don't know how the situation is on your side, Ron, but on the European side, my impression is that most of the colleagues in the European Parliament who want to be a member of the US delegation, which is responsible for the Transatlantic Legislators Dialogue in the European Parliament, I think they are, openly speaking, more interested in the prestige of being member of that delegation than they are interested in really shaping political agendas. And I think that is one of the key problems on our side. And therefore, what I try to do is I try to send more committees to the United States. I think we should try to bring more together our legislators who are working on the field in the committees, for instance, for environment or for energy or for climate, to bring them together to try to sort that out. And again, perhaps my expectation is too low, but I think the legislators' dialogue has to, let's say, take on board what our two administrations have to prepare. And that is draft legislation coming from the White House to Parliament, or on the US side, or coming from the European Commission to the European Parliament, which is, let's say, in an ideal world, the same, or has, let's say, compatible content. And then that combined with the clear message, dear parliaments on both sides of the Atlantic, please don't change too much, that we have the joint wording. And therefore, I think what we have to push, and that is our task, which we can do in however committee we are member or in however delegation we are member, to push our administrations to consult each other before bringing new legislative proposals, perhaps to try to see whether we see common ground. And again, I think what we saw in the Asian region just a few days ago, that is a wake-up call, that has to be a wake-up call which has to be heard. And then perhaps some of us go out of their comfort zone, and then we try to bring through those joint things. And therefore, again, I have to repeat this, but this lobster deal was a smart deal and a small deal, but it may be the beginning of something more. We haven't had that for many years.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so very much. Now I would like to give the floor to Lisa Schröter.
Thanks, Stormy, and thanks to you all for joining in. I think this is a great way of wrapping up a really good conversation we've been having all morning. I mean, to be candid, and as much as we'd all love to see TTIP come back into the agenda, I mean, we have 25 years of history of not making as much progress as we'd like to on the bilateral front, but we've talked today about common interest in climate change, the environment, digital trade, all areas where US and EU could work together in broader multilateral forum, which, Ron, as you said, plays to Biden's strengths too when we think about re-engaging in the multilateral world. You know, do you see opportunities to maybe, as we look to partner back up, focusing that engagement towards rebuilding the multilateral system? Would that be an area of making early progress that might lend us back to making progress on the bilateral? And to the points that you were just raising, Mr. Kaspari, I'd be interested, as all of you know TPN well, what role do you see TPN can play in being helpful on that? In particular, I was thinking with the legislators dialogue, that's a great opportunity as we bring more legislators together. TPN can play that bridge role too, of keeping these grounded in very common but also very constructive discussions. Thank you.
Well, Lisa, let me take a first shot at that. And by the way, very nice to see you today. I hope you've been staying safe during this crazy time. But listen, I think there will be a new approach to the US-China relationship that is very instrumental that we're on the same page with the EU in that approach. I think the America go it alone, the isolationist approach, the unilateral approach of the Trump administration has not worked, nor will it have much an effect on trying to influence China's behavior as we move forward. But if you create that multilateral alliance of the US and the EU and some of our other democratically aligned nations throughout the world, that is a much better approach. So I think it's going to be imperative that we focus on that area of commonality between the US and the EU and how we can leverage that in our relationship with China moving forward. I'm glad that one of your earlier sessions too had a discussion about the role of digital trade and how we can strengthen that. It's been one of our priorities with the trade negotiations of late, certainly with Mexico, Canada. We came out with a very strong trade digital chapter for that. Same with TPP that unfortunately, the current administration walked away from. But one irritant that needs to get resolved is the digital tax issue. And we need to continue that dialogue and find a landing place for that, or it will create a problem out of the block for the incoming Biden administration. So we have been following with interest what the goal and the objective is with the digital tax, but I think it's important that we don't box the Biden administration in on this issue right away as he's getting his legs under him, so to speak. So I just want to throw that out there as someone that has been involved in that issue too, and the bipartisan pushback that you've been seeing coming from the states on that.
Thank you so much. Mr. Kaspari?
Yeah, on the digital tax, I fully support what Ron said. I think it was not a good sign of our European member state to do this unilaterally and even without any joint approach in the European side. But the other thing is, I think we should do both. We should try to, again, revitalize the multilateral system and then work there and try to put China and others under pressure within the WTO, for instance. The second thing is we should try to work out things together and then open that for third parties. I think there will be many countries on the world who would love to join interesting approach, an interesting solution being presented by the United States and the European Union together. And that is why we always have to make sure that we also do our bilateral agreements and projects under the WTO umbrella, if possible, whenever possible, and to keep it open for others to join, that we don't become lonely riders on the transatlantic scheme, but we become, in Germany you say, riding the horse in front, but that means that others then should follow, and that you're really the riding the horse in front and not riding the horse alone, and therefore we really should engage better in that direction.
Thank you so very, very much. Sometimes German sayings don't translate so well into English, but it became very clear what you mean with this. Unfortunately, we are already at the end of the session. 30 minutes go by like this. There's so much more to talk. What this showed to me is one thing which has been a little bit lost over the last year is the trust and understanding in the transatlantic relationship. You too showed that there is a lot of trust and a lot of understanding, which we just have to bring to the forefront again, and also show our respective societies that there are much more commonalities, much more joint norms and values than the divisions. And I think we all have a job to do at home to do this explaining. And one thing I just want to emphasize and underline, the German business community, BDI and other associations, together with our counterparts in the United States, the US Chamber, we are certainly standing ready to ride that horse to get together and to use that window of opportunity to get us to a new level of a transatlantic trust and understanding. So thank you so very, very much to both of you for these for this very insightful discussion. And with this, I hand over to Jeffries again. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ron. Thank you so much, Danielle. Wonderful. Great stuff.
Thank you, Stormy. James, I'll hand straight back to you, but Stormy, that was a brilliant comment about rebuilding trust, just fits brilliantly with the theme of this program. So thank you for that, and thank you for your moderation. James.
Right. Well, listen, just in half a minute, because it's my role, I think, to thank everybody. But we all know these things happen because Vivian has actually put it all together as the person who has responsibility, along with Jorn and Jeffrey. So we can't clap you because we won't hear it. But Vivian, thank you so much for everything that you did to make us successful today. Secondly, thank you to all of you for participating, because it's been kind of short, but we get used to being online. You have to be really concise and you have to be really direct, but all of you have been exactly that. And we've got a very rich kind of ideas, I think, for us to build in the months ahead. So last and not least is we're looking forward to some face-to-face meetings in 2021. We will be heading to Washington, a lot of us, for the July Transatlantic Week. And in the meantime, we're going to be building up these linkages in these different subject areas. So, Ron, we will be knocking on your door, and I shall be very much looking forward to seeing you. And Daniel, too, we look very much forward to working. This is a wonderfully positive kind of environment on economics, on digital, and on the broader kind of things we heard from Wendy earlier. So listen, over and out. Thanks so very much indeed. We'll be seeing each other shortly. Thank you.